Greasy hands and a mountain of eviction notices were all Caspian Fisher had to his name until a sleek, damaged Maybach sputtered into his crumbling Chicago auto shop. Fixing that engine cost him his last dime, but the man behind the tinted glass paid him back in dangerous, unimaginable ways. Caspian Fisher wiped a streak of Pennzoil from his forehead, leaving a smudge of black across his pale, exhausted face. The digital clock on the wall of Fisher Auto Repair flickered its red neon tubes, buzzing violently, before settling on 1:14 a.m. The shop, nestled in the forgotten industrial fringes of Chicago's Lower West Side, was a relic. It was a cavern of cracked concrete, echoing with the ghosts of a booming manufacturing era that had long since abandoned the city. On the cluttered desk in the corner sat a stack of final notices from Chase Bank and a handwritten, violently scrawled note from Mickey Sullivan, a local loan shark who lacked the patience of corporate banks. Mickey had promised to return by sunrise to collect the $40,000 Caspian owed, or he was going to collect Caspian's hands instead. Caspian stared at his hands. They were calloused, scarred, and completely broke. He was just about to pull the heavy corrugated metal shutter down for the night when the chaotic sound of grinding metal and a sputtering V12 engine tore through the quiet street. Caspian paused. Out of the dense, freezing fog rolled a midnight black Mercedes Maybach S680. It was a $300,000 fortress on wheels, but right now it was limping. Smoke billowed from beneath the expansive hood, and the front left tire was riding entirely on a mangled custom rim, sparking aggressively against the asphalt. The luxury sedan lurched into Caspian's open garage bay and died with a heavy metallic hiss. For a moment, Caspian didn't move. Cars like that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Usually when a vehicle worth more than Caspian's life rolled down Halsted Street at 1 a.m., it meant someone was about to disappear. He instinctively reached for the heavy iron tire iron resting on his workbench. The driver's side door swung open. Instead of a heavily armed hitman, a woman stumbled out. She was breathtaking even in her absolute panic. She wore a tailored ivory cashmere coat, something out of a Tom Ford catalogue, that was severely out of place amidst the grease and grime of the shop. Her dark hair was dishevelled, and her hands shook violently as she clutched a dead iPhone. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling, but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. "I need help. The car just died. I think I hit something on the expressway, and it's completely unresponsive." Caspian slowly lowered the tire iron. "Lady, this isn't exactly a neighborhood you want to be stranded in at this hour. You need to call a tow." "My phone is dead," she said, stepping closer, her eyes darting nervously toward the foggy street outside. "And I can't wait for a tow. I need to keep moving. I have money. Whatever it costs, just get it running. Please." Caspian sighed, tossing his rag onto the workbench. "Pop the hood." As she fumbled with the latch, Caspian grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and moved toward the smoking beast. He lifted the massive hood, waving away the thick, acrid cloud of burning coolant. He flashed the beam deep into the engine bay. The serpentine belt had completely shredded, likely due to a seized pulley, and the radiator was punctured, bleeding bright green fluid all over the shop floor. "You didn't hit a pothole?" Caspian muttered, his trained eyes catching the jagged, precise hole in the aluminum radiator. "This looks like a bullet hole. A high-caliber one, too. It pierced the housing and chewed up the belt." The woman went rigid. She didn't gasp, nor did she act surprised. The silence that followed was heavier than the engine block in front of him. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her tone suddenly shifting from panicked to dangerously cold. "Radiator's shot. Belt is gone. The rim is completely destroyed." Caspian listed, shaking his head. "Even if I had the parts for a Maybach, which I don't, this is a 6-hour job." "You have to," she insisted, stepping into his personal space. Up close, Caspian could smell her perfume, a mix of vanilla and something sharp like ozone. "I know this shop. My father said Fisher Auto was the best in the city 20 years ago. If you are a Fisher, you can fix this." Caspian swallowed hard. His father had built this place, but his father was gone, leaving him nothing but the building and the debt. He looked at the woman, really looked at her. Beneath the expensive clothes and the demanding posture, she was terrified. Someone was hunting her, and if they caught up to her here, Caspian knew he would be collateral damage. "I don't have Maybach parts," Caspian said quietly. "But I have an old universal aluminum radiator in the back I was saving for my Ford F-150. I might be able to custom weld the brackets to fit. As for the belt, I can jury-rig a heavy-duty industrial band to get the water pump and alternator turning. It won't be pretty, and you won't be able to go over 60, but it'll get you out of Chicago." "Do it," she said instantly. For the next 3 hours, Caspian worked like a man possessed. He dragged his heavy welding rig over sparks, illuminating the dim garage, as he fabricated crude but effective mounts for the replacement radiator. He worked in complete silence, deeply aware of the woman pacing nervously near the rear of the shop, constantly checking the foggy street outside. He replaced the shredded tire with a standard, cheap spare he found in his scrap pile. It looked ridiculous on the Maybach, but it held air. By 4:30 a.m., Caspian tightened the last clamp on the coolant hose. He slammed the heavy hood down. "Start it," he ordered. The woman slid into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition. The V12 roared to life. It sounded a little rougher than it should have, thanks to the makeshift belt, but the temperature gauge remained steady. She stepped out, reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out a sleek leather Prada wallet and opened it. Her face fell. I only have credit cards. I left my cash at the estate." "I don't take cards," Caspian said, wiping his hands on a fresh rag. "Especially not tonight. Just go." "I can't leave without paying you," she protested. "You practically rebuilt the front end. Take my watch." She moved to unclasped a glittering, diamond-encrusted Rolex from her wrist. Caspian caught her wrist, stopping her. His rough, grease-stained fingers contrasted sharply with her flawless skin. "I don't want your watch. If whoever put that bullet in your radiator catches you, I don't want a piece of your jewelry linking you to me. I did this so you could leave. So leave." She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face for a long moment. Finally, she nodded, pulling her hand back slowly. "What is your name?" "Caspian." "I am Bianca," she said softly. "You are a good man, Caspian Fisher. Those are rare." Without another word, she climbed back into the Maybach. The heavy tires squealed against the slick concrete as she threw it into reverse, spun the massive car around, and vanished into the freezing Chicago mist. Caspian watched her tail lights fade. He was exhausted, his best spare parts were gone, and he was still $40,000 in debt. He locked the bay doors, walked into his tiny, unheated office, and collapsed onto the worn leather sofa, waiting for Mickey Sullivan to arrive and end his life. The violent shattering of glass jolted Caspian awake. He bolted upright from the office sofa, his heart hammering against his ribs. The morning sun was bleeding through the grimy windows, but the light was blocked by several massive, hulking silhouettes standing in his garage. "Wakey, wakey, Caspian," a grating, venomous voice echoed through the shop. Caspian stepped out of the office. Standing in the center of his garage was Mickey Sullivan. Mickey was a barrel-chested brute with a flattened nose and a cruel smile. He held a heavy steel wrench, one of Caspian's own snap-on tools, and used it to lazily smash the headlight of an old Honda Civic Caspian had been restoring for a client. Behind Mickey stood two of his enforcer's guys, built like brick walls, cracking their knuckles. "Time's up, kid," Mickey sneered, tapping the wrench against his palm. 40 grand, plus 5 for the inconvenience of me having to drive down here in the cold." "I don't have it, Mickey." Caspian said, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the cold dread pooling in his stomach. I need more time. Just give me another month. Mickey laughed, a harsh, barking sound. A month, Caspian, your daddy owed me, and now you owe me. The bank is foreclosing on this dump tomorrow anyway. Since you don't have my money, I'm taking the deed to this land, and I'm taking your right hand. Grab him, boys. The two enforcers lunged forward. Caspian threw a desperate right hook, catching the first thug in the jaw, but the second one tackled him to the concrete floor. Pain exploded in Caspian's ribs as a heavy boot slammed into his side. They dragged him toward the center of the shop, pinning his right arm flat against an oil-stained anvil. Mickey stepped up, raising the heavy steel wrench high above his head. Nothing personal, kid. Just business. Before the wrench could fall, the deafening screech of tires echoed outside. Mickey paused, frowning, as the screech was followed by the slamming of heavy car doors. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps approached the open garage bay. Drop the wrench, Mickey, or they won't find enough of you to bury. The voice was quiet, cultured, but carried an absolute, terrifying authority that froze the blood in Caspian's veins. Mickey slowly lowered the wrench and turned. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale grey. Mr. Woods, I didn't know you were in the neighborhood. Standing in the entrance of the garage was Lamont Woods. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed impeccably in a charcoal three-piece Brioni suit beneath a tailored cashmere overcoat. His silver hair was swept back perfectly, and his eyes, dark, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy, were locked on to Mickey. Behind Lamont stood 6 men in dark suits, armed with suppressed Heckler and Koch, MP-5 submachine guns, held openly and casually. Beyond them, Caspian could see 3 identical, pristine, black Cadillac Escalades, idling on Halsted Street, completely blocking traffic. "You are breathing my air, Mickey," Lamont said softly, stepping into the garage. He didn't look at Caspian. He didn't look at the dirt. He just looked at the loan shark. "And you are attempting to harm a man who is under my protection." Mickey dropped the wrench. It clattered loudly against the concrete. "Your protection, Mr. Woods, please, this kid owes me money. I didn't know he was with the family. I swear to God I didn't know." Lamont raised a single finger. The 2 enforcers holding Caspian instantly scrambled away, raising their hands in surrender. "The debt is forgiven," Lamont stated. "It wasn't a request. And if I ever see your face within 5 miles of this shop again, I will have you fed to the dogs at the Navy Pier docks. Leave." Mickey and his men didn't say a word. They bolted out the side door, sprinting down the alleyway as if the devil himself were chasing them. Caspian slowly pushed himself up from the concrete, wincing as he clutched his bruised ribs. He leaned against his workbench, staring at the most powerful, ruthless mafia boss in the Midwest. Lamont finally turned his gaze to Caspian. Those dark eyes analyzed him, weighing him in a matter of seconds. "You are Caspian Fisher," Lamont said, stepping forward. "I am," Caspian managed to say, his throat dry. Though I don't know why Lamont Woods gives a damn about a mechanic. The rear door of the center Escalade opened. Bianca stepped out. In the daylight, she was even more striking. She had traded her ivory coat for a sharp, tailored black suit. She walked into the garage, her eyes locking onto Caspian, with a mixture of gratitude and something much more dangerous. "Because last night," Lamont said, gesturing slightly to his daughter, "my enemies attempted to assassinate my daughter on the I-90. She survived the ambush, but her vehicle was crippled. She sought refuge in this absolute miserable excuse for a neighborhood, and instead of taking advantage of her, robbing her, or selling her out to the men hunting her, you protected her." Caspian looked at Bianca. She offered him a very faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I just fixed a car," Caspian said, shaking his head. I used a spare radiator. It wasn't a big deal. Do not insult my intelligence by downplaying your honor, Lamont commanded, his voice sharp. You gave her your last functional parts. You refused her payment to ensure she couldn't be traced. In my world, Mr. Fisher, loyalty and honor are the only currencies that matter. You saved the blood of the Woods family, and the Woods family pays its debts. Lamont snapped his fingers. One of his suited men stepped forward, handing Lamont a thick manila envelope. Lamont tossed it onto Caspian's desk. It landed heavily, scattering the eviction notices. Inside that envelope, Lamont explained calmly, is the deed to this property. It is now fully in your name. There is also a cashier's check from a legitimate holding company for $500,000 to upgrade this facility. Caspian stared at the envelope, utterly paralyzed. I can't take this. It's too much. It is not a gift, Lamont said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming a velvet-wrapped threat. It is a retainer. You showed me last night that you are resourceful, discreet, and that you know how to keep your mouth shut. My family requires a private mechanic. We have a fleet of vehicles that occasionally suffer unique damage. Bullet holes, shattered glass, custom modifications for weight and speed. You will fix them. You will ask no questions. And you will work exclusively for me. Caspian felt the walls closing in. He had just escaped the frying pan of Mickey Sullivan, only to be tossed directly into the blazing inferno of the Woods crime syndicate. He looked at the envelope. It was freedom from debt, freedom from starvation. But it was a tether to a life of crime. He looked at Bianca. She was watching him intently, her dark eyes practically burning into his. And if I say no? Caspian asked quietly. Lamont smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I do not make offers that can be refused, Caspian. Welcome to the family. 6 months transformed Fisher Auto Repair from a crumbling relic into an impenetrable state-of-the-art fortress. Behind the newly installed reinforced steel bay doors, the suffocating grime of Caspian's past had been scrubbed clean. The cracked concrete was replaced with pristine, slate-grey epoxy floors. The rusted tools were swapped for a sprawling wall of pneumatic wrenches, high-end fabrication equipment, and computerized diagnostic machines that rivaled a Formula One pit lane. Caspian lived in a surreal high-stakes ecosystem of brushed steel, forged carbon fiber, and absolute silence. He replaced shattered ballistic glass on heavy Mercedes G-Wagons, reinforced the chassis of getaway vehicles to handle the weight of tactical armor, and power-washed deep, rust-colored stains from the interiors of luxury sedans without ever asking a single question. The pay was astronomical. The danger was entirely unspoken. And then there was Bianca. She did not just drop off cars, she lingered. At least twice a week the heavy bay doors would slide open to admit her sleek Porsche Panamera. While Caspian worked, she would sit on a customized leather stool near his workbench, watching his hands move with a mechanic's precise, brutal grace. The terrifying aura she carried in her father's presence softened when it was just the two of them. In the quiet hours of the night, amidst the scent of motor oil and expensive espresso, she always brought him the boundaries between the mafia princess and the captive mechanic began to blur. You work too late, Bianca said. One Thursday evening, her voice slicing through the hum of the garage's ventilation system. She was wearing a deep crimson silk blouse, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. My father pays you enough to hire a dozen assistants, Caspian. You don't have to do every talk and weld yourself. Caspian slid out from beneath a heavily modified Audi RS6, wiping a smear of grease from his jaw with a blue shop towel. He looked up at her, feeling that familiar, dangerous pull in his chest. Your father doesn't pay me to outsource Bianca. He pays me for discretion. If I bring in outsiders, they see the bullet holes. They see the hidden compartments. I prefer to keep my head attached to my shoulders." Bianca offered a sad, knowing smile, sliding off her stool and walking over to him. She closed the distance until she was inches away, the intoxicating scent of vanilla and ozone wrapping around him. She reached out her manicured fingers, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. The contrast of her delicate touch against his calloused skin sent a jolt of electricity down his spine. "You are not a prisoner here, Caspian," she murmured, her dark eyes locking onto his. "You saved my life. You rebuilt my father's fleet. You are important to us, important to me." Caspian swallowed hard, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He wanted to pull her in, to let the simmering tension between them ignite, but the shadow of Lamont Woods loomed too large. "In your world, Bianca being important is usually a death sentence." Before she could reply, the secure phone on Caspian's desk emitted a sharp, shrill ring. The moment shattered. Bianca stepped back, her posture instantly stiffening back into the cold, calculated posture of a mafia heir. Caspian picked up the receiver. "Fisher. Mr. Fisher." The gravelly voice of Arthur Costello Lamont's ruthless underboss crackled through the speaker. "The boss's personal armored Bentley is en route. It's making a strange grinding noise in the steering column. We need it checked and cleared by midnight for a meeting at the port. Ensure the shop is empty." "Bring it in," Caspian replied, hanging up the phone. He turned to Bianca. "Your father's car is coming. You should go." Arthur sounded tense. A flicker of concern crossed Bianca's face. Arthur is always tense. Be careful, Caspian. 30 minutes later, the massive midnight blue Bentley Mulsanne rolled into the bay. Arthur Costello, a tall, gaunt man with a face scarred by decades of violence, tossed the heavy key fob onto Caspian's chest. Without a word, Arthur and his 2 bodyguards retreated to the street, sealing the steel doors behind them to secure the perimeter. Caspian hoisted the massive vehicle on the hydraulic lift, grabbing his high-powered inspection light. He checked the power steering reservoir, the tie rods, and the rack and pinion. Everything mechanical was flawless. Frowning, he grabbed a specialized electronic scanner and plugged it into the OBD2 port under the dashboard, looking for electrical faults. The scanner immediately threw a bizarre error code he had never seen before, an anomaly drawing massive power from the ignition relay, completely bypassing the car's security firewall. Caspian grabbed a screwdriver and carefully popped off the panels beneath the steering column. He shined his light into the labyrinth of wires. His breath caught in his throat, tucked deep behind the digital cluster, wired directly into the ignition switch, and the steering angle sensor was a block of military-grade C4 explosive. A small blinking red LED pulsed steadily alongside a GPS trigger. It was a sophisticated, perfectly executed trap. The bomb wasn't set to a timer. It was rigged to detonate the moment the steering wheel was turned a full 90 degrees, while the engine was running. Whoever planted it knew Lamont's route to the port involved taking the sharp hairpin turn onto the interstate on-ramp, and the wire splicing was fresh. The dust on the paneling hadn't even settled. Caspian's blood ran cold. This wasn't the work of a rival gang. Rival gangs didn't have access to the interior of Lamont Woods' personal vault on wheels. This was an inside job, and the only person who had access to the vehicle before it arrived here was Arthur Costello. Caspian didn't panic. He carefully backed away from the Bentley, leaving the panel open. He needed to warn Lamont, but any outgoing call on the secure line would likely be intercepted by Arthur's men waiting outside. He reached into his pocket for his personal cell phone, dialing Bianca's private number. "Caspian," her voice came through, sounding slightly out of breath. "Bianca, listen to me very carefully," Caspian whispered, keeping his eyes on the garage doors. "Do not let your father get into the Bentley tonight. There is a device wired to the steering column. It's an inside job. I think Arthur..." The heavy metallic screech of the garage's side door being kicked open cut him off. Caspian dropped his phone, kicking it under the workbench, just as Arthur Costello stepped into the shop, a suppressed pistol gripped firmly in his gloved hand. 2 enforcers flanked him, their weapons drawn and levelled squarely at Caspian's chest. "You always were too thorough a mechanic," Arthur said smoothly, his eyes darting to the removed panelling under the Bentley's dashboard. "I figured a grease monkey like you would just check the power steering fluid and give it a clean bill of health. You had to go digging. You're going to kill your own boss," Caspian stated, backing up slowly toward his heavy tool chests. "Lamont is old. He's soft," Arthur sneered, stepping closer. "He gave $1 million auto shop to a nobody just because you changed a tire for his spoiled daughter. The family needs new blood. Tonight, Lamont takes a sharp turn. The car goes up in flames, and I step in to comfort the grieving syndicate. Now turn around and get on your knees. I'll make it quick." "I don't think so," Caspian said. With a sudden violent motion, Caspian slammed his fist down on the hydraulic lift's emergency release button. The safety locks disengaged with a deafening crack. The massive 4-ton armored Bentley plummeted from the lift. It slammed into the concrete floor with earth-shattering force, shaking the foundation of the building and throwing Arthur and his men off balance. Using the distraction, Caspian dove behind a heavy steel tire-mounting machine as suppressed gunfire hissed through the air. Bullets chewed through the epoxy floor and shattered the diagnostic monitors above his head. "Flush him out!" Arthur roared. Caspian grabbed a heavy acetylene torch tank. He unscrewed the valve, letting the highly flammable gas hiss into the air, and rolled the heavy cylinder across the floor toward the enforcers. As it rolled, he snatched a magnesium flare from his emergency kit, struck it against the concrete, and hurled it toward the hissing tank. "Down!" one of the enforcers screamed. The explosion was contained, but fierce a concussive shockwave of heat and blinding white light that knocked the 2 enforcers off their feet. Caspian didn't hesitate. He vaulted over his cover, wielding a massive 3-foot steel breaker bar. He swung it like a baseball bat, catching the closest enforcer in the ribs with a sickening crunch. The man crumpled. Arthur emerged from the smoke, raising his pistol, aiming directly at Caspian's head. "Cute tricks, mechanic, but you're out of tools." Suddenly the deafening roar of a V12 engine tore through the smoke. Bianca's Porsche, Panamera, smashed through the reinforced glass of the front office, ripping the framing completely out of the wall and ploughing directly into the garage. The car skidded to a halt, pinning the second enforcer against a structural pillar. Arthur spun toward the noise. Bianca kicked her car door open, stepping out with a compact 9mm Glock held perfectly steady in both hands. "Drop it, Arthur," she commanded, her voice ringing with the lethal authority of her father. Arthur laughed, swinging his gun toward her. "Little Bianca, you always were too brave for your own good." He fired. Bianca ducked behind the reinforced door of the Porsche as the bullet shattered the window above her head. Before Arthur could re-aim, Caspian lunged. He swung the heavy steel breaker bar with everything he had, slamming it into the back of Arthur's knees. The underboss howled in pain, collapsing to the floor. Caspian dropped the bar, grabbed Arthur by the collar, and delivered a brutal, devastating right hook that instantly knocked the traitor unconscious. Silence fell over the garage, broken only by the hiss of the dying acetylene fire and the settling dust. Caspian stood, breathing heavily, his knuckles bruised and bleeding. He looked across the wreckage of his pristine shop at Bianca. She slowly lowered her weapon, stepping away from the crushed car, her eyes wide, as she took in the carnage. "You came back," Caspian rasped his voice, rough. "You called," she replied simply, stepping carefully over the debris until she was standing right in front of him. Without a word, she reached out, pulling him down by the collar of his grease-stained shirt, and kissed him. It was a fierce, desperate collision of adrenaline and repressed desire, sealing a bond forged in fire and oil. The heavy screech of tires echoed outside. 3 identical black Cadillac Escalades swerved into the driveway. Lamont Woods stepped out, flanked by a dozen heavily armed loyalists. The mafia boss took in the sight of his destroyed shop, the unconscious traitor on the floor. The rigged Bentley and his daughter locked in the arms of his mechanic. Lamont's cold eyes softened for a fraction of a second. He turned to his men. "Clean up this mess. Take Arthur to the docks. He has a date with the water." Lamont looked at Caspian, giving a slow, deeply respectful nod. "It seems, Mr. Fisher, I am in your debt once again. Whatever you need to rebuild it is yours. You are no longer just my mechanic. You are family." Caspian pulled back slightly, looking down into Bianca's eyes. The debt was paid, the enemies were buried, and the blue-collar boy from the Lower West Side had just become the most untouchable man in Chicago. "I'll need a bigger garage," Caspian said softly, pulling her close once more. Did Caspian's ultimate choice to embrace the underworld for love leave you breathless if you enjoyed this gripping tale of loyalty, high-stakes mafia drama, and forbidden romance? Hit that like button and share it with fellow fiction lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding audio stories delivered straight to your feed. Drop a comment below, telling us what you would have done in Caspian's shoes, and stay tuned for our next cinematic adventure.